Welcome back to those of you who have. Tonight we are honored to welcome Tamara Draut, Vice President of Policy and Research at Demos, to discuss her brand new second book, Sleeping Giant: How the New Working Class Will Transform America. Tonight, Tamara is joined by Bob Herbert, Distinguished Senior Fellow at Demos, and, among other accolades, the recipient of the American Society of News Editors Award for Distinguished Newspaper Writing at the New York Times. Please join me in welcoming Heather McGee, President of Demos, to introduce Tamara and Bob.
Thank you so much, and thank you, as always, to the Strand Bookstore for not only being one of the finest places to be in this incredible city of ours, but really having a wonderful program of ideas and letters that Demos Fellows and authors have been just really proud to be a part of over the years. I am so excited to be here tonight to kick off today on the publication date of Doubleday's new blockbuster bestseller, Sleeping Giant. So I'm not going to take up much of your time because we really want to hear from the award-winning, amazing Bob Herbert and from Tammy Draut about this book. But I just want to situate this moment that we're in right now and why this book, Sleeping Giant, is so important to our political context, to our economic context, and to what we're trying to create at Demos. As many of you know, Demos is a public policy organization headquartered here in New York that for the past 15 years has been using research, communication, advocacy, and legal strategies to work for an America where we all have an equal say in our democracy and an equal chance in our economy. This issue of the inequality that has crept into the heart of both our democracy and our economy is something that Demos has been at the forefront and really ahead of the curve in championing in our public debate, putting out ideas about how we can address inequality, such as the Credit Card Act of 2009, which in partnership with one of our dear institutional friends, Senator Elizabeth Warren, really helped rewrite the rules for credit cards and lending in America and has saved over $50 billion in fees alone, to the issue of debt-free college for all, which is a signature Demos issue, which is now at the center of our public debate. As well, we've been working on issues of wage inequality, and I can start ticking off all the different victories that Demos has been proud to help contribute to, but all we have to really say at this moment right now is the fight for 15, which has brought us $15 an hour in the two of the largest economies in our country. And what you may not all know is that behind many of those victories, behind all of those victories that I just spelled out, has been Tamara Draut. She has been our Vice President for Policy and Research at Demos. It will be 15 years in June that she's been leading the intellectual work of the organization and really having a very strong vision for how to place the concerns of ordinary Americans into the center of the public debate and back on the political agenda. Her first book, Strapped, which was out in 2005, also from Doubleday, really helped the country focus in on something that we now take for granted as a piece of our political and public discourse, that the millennial generation was the first generation to be worse off than their parents economically, and that frankly it's been a whole suite of conservative policies that brought us to that place. Sleeping Giant is about to be a similar kind of book that really resets the conversation and helps the chattering class focus on the working class. So please join me in welcoming and thanking Tammy Draut, Bob Herbert, who is here tonight in place of Joy Reid, who was swept away to Wisconsin because apparently there's a primary tonight that's going to be a very big deal. Thank you so much all for coming and supporting Demos and supporting this wonderful book.
So here we go. So I'm going to start by saying just flat out, this is a great book. Now, I started out biased. Tammy and Miles Rappaport brought me to Demos, and I've known Tammy for a while, and I'm crazy about her and crazy about her work. and not surprised that she wrote a great book. But trust me, it's beyond that. It's a really, really good book, and it's also a really interesting read. So besides being an important book, it's a really good book to read. I have enough questions here to keep us for about 4 hours, but I'm not going to do that. Let's get right to it. I think we're going to chat for about half an hour, and then Tammy is going to be kind enough to take some questions. So, Tammy, you dedicated this book to your dad, who was, we generally thought of as sort of the traditional white, blue-collar, working-class males, and in those days it was mostly men. And you wrote in your book that working class is dead, but the working class is not dead. And that profound distinction sort of gets to the heart of your book. So talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, happy to. Everybody hear me okay? Back row? Good. All right. Thank you for coming. So I grew up in a working class household. My dad was a machinist at the local steel factory for 29 years, and my mom was an office manager at the local orthodontist office. But like much of the industrial working class, we were working class by occupation and education level, but middle class in terms of lifestyle. And by middle class, I mean my dad had a good pension, we always had health care, we always had food in the cupboards and in the fridge. We actually took a yearly vacation to Myrtle Beach. Of course, it was a 12-hour drive in a minivan with all my brothers and sisters, but nonetheless, it was a vacation. And most importantly, they were able to send me to a state college and pay full freight, and I left without debt. So that working class, and I think still to this day when people say working class, even in our political debate, they're actually talking about white, blue-collar men. And so I wanted to write the book to make the statement that that is a shrinking part of the working class today. But there's a new service sector working class. And that working class is much more female, because women's labor force participation rates have increased significantly. And it's much more people of color. And the type of work they do, it has shifted from making stuff to serving people. And so I spent a lot of time in the book talking about what that means, what that shift alone means, and how it has contributed to the marginalization and invisibility of so many working class people today.
One of the points you make in the book is that, and it leads up to the idea of how this working class might transform America, is that this working class is in fact enormous, that it's huge, even though we don't hear a lot about it. In fact, we don't hear the term working class very much anymore. That was a common term when I was growing up. So give us a sense of just how huge, how large this class of people is.
Yeah, I love to say how large it is, because most people greatly underestimate. So I define working class, as do many social scientists, as people who are in the labor force without four-year college degrees. And that's about 2/3 of all workers. Most college-educated people, when you throw them that statistic, they're like, what? Really? I had no idea. None of you look surprised, so maybe you're all very well-read.
This is New York, Tim.
I can tell you, a lot of journalists are very befuddled when I tell them that. So it's a huge, huge part of the labor force. And in fact, it's the majority of all workers. And just to give you another slice on it, it is most people who are in the labor force get paid by the hour and not an annual salary. And the United States has the largest percentage of workers who make less than $15 an hour anywhere on the globe.
You've mentioned that this new working class is much more people of color, much more female. But if it is so huge, the idea that there's been this kind of a transformation in the United States that hasn't gotten a lot of attention reminds me of the great migration of blacks from the South over many years that also was historic and didn't get much attention at the time. Why hasn't this transformation gotten more attention?
I think there are two big reasons, well, three. The first two are race and gender. And the third is the loss of the one institution that really represented working class people historically in our country, and that's unions. So as the working class has become more female and more people of color, and the work has shifted again from making stuff to serving people, African Americans, Latinos, women have long had this sort of second-class citizenship status in our country. And the work that they have done historically has either been expected to be free, enforced, or completely undervalued. And that is the case today, where we see that the work that the new working class is doing is undervalued compared to the work that the old industrial class did. A lot of that is because of the demise of union representation in these jobs. Let's not forget that part of the demand of Fight for 15 is 15 and a union, and that's an important piece to remember. But I think it's really about the long historical exclusion of women and people of color in our economy, and then the complete undervaluing of the work they do. And in the last chapter I look at, if you look at the jobs that are going to add the most to our economy in the next 10 years, retail, fast food, home health, janitorial services, those occupations are the lowest paid, and they are predominantly filled by women and people of color. And so our labor market, particularly among the working class, is highly segregated. And this is, 50 years after the Civil Rights Act. And it's so segregated today that if we were to try and achieve complete racial integration in the types of jobs that people have access to and do for a living, half of all people would have to switch jobs in our economy.
I'll get back to some of these issues, but as I mentioned, this is a really highly readable book. So give us a sense of, you mentioned, you profile so many people and tell their stories in the book. So just pick a couple and give us a sense of who they are and the kind of challenges that they're facing.
Thank you for asking that question. I met so many great people and who really opened up and spent a lot of time talking to me about their lives. And I want to share 3 quotes that are deep in my heart and in my head every time I talk about this book, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about a couple of them. I interviewed a couple. She is a home health aide, and he is a commercial sanitation driver near Atlanta, Georgia. And his name's LaShawn, and he said to me, "I feel like the working class are the lepers of society, needed to build the economy, keep it strong, but totally disregarded when it comes to our needs." I interviewed Rhonda, who's a white female port truck driver in Savannah. And she said, if you know anything about port truckers, they're called independent. They're treated like they're independent contractors, but really they're not. And she referred to her work situation as treating us like sharecroppers on wheels. And then finally, there's Damon, who is officially Gregory Lambert in real life and is joining the book event at the National Press Club. And he used to work at the Coca-Cola distribution warehouse in Atlanta. And he said, "We're making them billions of dollars. I will never understand why they treat us like something you'd step on in the grass. I will never understand that." And I hold up those 3 individuals because one of the things that didn't surprise me, but it hit me hard as a through line in everybody I interviewed, and lots of people didn't end up in the book. I probably talked to 50 different families, is the level of disrespect that they felt surrounded them, both on the job, in society, in terms of what our politicians care about, who they're talking about, who they're trying to win votes from. Just a complete feeling of disrespect and undervaluing. And that transcended whether they were home health aides or fast food workers, retail workers, and it stood in really sharp contrast to how much value they got from the work they did. And the pride at which they spoke. I talked to a woman who works in the electronics department at Walmart, and she was talking about how she gets so much satisfaction at helping customers figure out what kind of camera they should buy and setting up the display case so that it's the most, appealingly attractive to the eye. And you hear the way she's treated on the job. And one of the things I took away from this is that our frontline supervisors in this country need some radical retraining and have an inordinate amount of power over job quality and job conditions, and frankly are subjecting to so many people in the working class to a level of disdain and condescension that is pretty frightening, and that I hope if some CEOs or business leaders read the book, that will be one thing they take away from it. There's a lot of policy solutions in the book, but this is one of those that is less about policy and more about really rewriting the way you manage a company from the top.
Now, your timing always seems to be impeccable. I'm not sure how you do this, but your first book, Strapped.
Turn it in late.
Maybe that's the key. Your first book, Strapped, How America's 20 and 30-somethings, Why America's 20 and 30-somethings Can't Get Ahead, was really at the beginning of this curve about the millennials and the great challenges that they've been facing, and we all now know about that, but you were there in the early days. This book about this huge, I can't even say burgeoning because it's been around, but this huge transformation of the working class is now front and center in the current presidential election. And again, your timing is just absolutely perfect. How do you do this, and what prompted you and when to write this story?
So, thank you. I'm just lucky, I think. I started, the seed of this idea probably started germinating in my head maybe 3 years ago. And I wrote the proposal when I was on a very generous sabbatical that Demos provides for any employee that's been there 7 years. You get 3 months of paid sabbatical time. And I used some of that time to write the proposal for the book. And so Fight for 15, I think, when I was writing the proposal, had just started, and it was really just in New York. And then when I started writing the book, it really blew up. So it's been in the works for a long time. I think I just want to hit on your point about the working class being in our political debate, because I wrote a piece about this that was on Market Watch. And there's the beginning of chapter 4 talks about how every 4 years, all of a sudden, we rediscover the working class. But we rediscover the white male working class. And that is largely, if you read the coverage, the working class by and large is only being talked about in relation to, all right, we made it 20 minutes without mentioning Donald Trump. I thought it was going to come up earlier. The working class is really only coming up in relation to Donald Trump's support among the white working class, and less so in terms of how the rest of the working class is voting. And the rest of the working class is largely voting for Bernie or Hillary.
Which has been, I think, a misconception among the pundit class that the working class has gone totally to the Republicans. Again, it's a focus almost obsessively on the blue-collar white working class, but the working class has been, half or more of the working class has been voting Democratic, all along for all these years.
Yeah.
One of the things that's similar, or strikes me as similar about the old working class and the new working class is the ferment. I mean, periodically people just get, I guess, fed up and they decide to stand up and they're going to fight for their rights. So could you talk a little bit about this? You've touched on it, but talk a little more about this, this ferment, this new militancy that we're seeing among the working class.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I would argue, which I do in the book, that if we really want to create economic security where everybody who isn't independently affluent can enjoy the freedom of being economically secure, we really have to have a thriving and strong working class. That we will not get the kinds of policies and transformation in our economic system without that. So I am thrilled to see that the sleeping giant is awakening. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about what's happening is if you look at the Fight for 15 and you look at Black Lives Matter and you look at the Dreamers who are teenagers and college students who were brought here by their parents who are pushing to allow to be able to get tuition at state, the in-cost state price, in-state tuition, sorry, is that these movements, one, have proved that they are here to stay. Actually, on April 14th is going to be a huge day of action for the Fight for 15. And you're seeing particularly a sharing of agendas across those movements. And I think that has been a long time coming in the progressive movement. It's hard to hold together, but I especially want to lift up Black Lives Matter because I think not only are they directly confronting and raising awareness about police and oppression in communities of color by the police, but they're also weaving in the economic exclusion story, which is so important because the reality is that the deindustrialization that sort of wiped out the blue-collar working class also led to the decimation of many urban communities when those factories closed. And so the rise of the mass incarceration and the deindustrialization and the offshoring of jobs are really deeply linked. And I touch on that a little bit in the book, but Michelle Alexander wrote the book connecting those two things. But I think it's important, and I think it's really amazing how the movement for Black lives have really held all of those types of exclusion and oppression together and brought a lot of white support along with them.
I agree with that. I think it's unbelievably important what's going on there. I only hope that it gets sustained. It can be sustained. Little editorial comment there.
Well, you used to be an editorial writer, so you're allowed to have opinions.
I only have an
yes,
opinion here and there.
And good opinions at that.
Thank you. What we've seen happening to the middle class, and I mean the working class, and what I mean now is the working class writ large, what we've seen as tended to view as the traditional working class, and this new working class that you're writing about, has been horrible. I mean, it's really been lousy. We've watched the sort of downward mobility and the loss of political clout in the working class. And one of the points you make in the book is that this has not been the result of sort of these impersonal so-called market forces, that there was nothing that was inevitable about this, that this was a result of deliberate efforts on the behalf of largely big business, conservative forces, mostly Republican. If it has worked against the interests of the working class, how have these forces been so successful?
Because they have money. So I trace this shift, I call it the shift from big labor to big business. And it really started in the 70s as a real backlash to what was an incredibly powerful union movement, an incredibly powerful consumer movement, environmental movement, and anti-war movement. And business at the time felt just besieged. And they kind of were. But if you are the public, you actually feel like finally the government was doing things that were in the public interest. But business felt just aggressively attacked. And so in 1971, a man named Lewis Powell wrote what is now known as a very famous memo called the Powell Memo. He went on to become a Supreme Court justice after just like 3 months after writing this memo. In the memo, he basically urges CEOs and business leaders to organize themselves and basically lays out a plan in 6 pages of how business needs to really fight back and save the free enterprise system. And part of that plan is urging the Chamber of Commerce to really become much more aggressive and proactive in beating back what they perceive as anti-business. So that memo was delivered. It quickly was discovered, which actually made it all the more interesting and made many more CEOs pay attention to it. And very quickly, business took up that call to arms and set up PACs. The Chamber of Commerce doubled or tripled in a short period of time, and they became very politically powerful and quickly eclipsed the clout of unions in terms of the amount of money they had to spend. So that's one thing that happened, and then the Supreme Court helped out tremendously by loosening campaign finance limits in 1976, and then again with Citizens United, so that the spigot of corporate spending is now unlimited. So that was one thing. You had this big shift, and then at the same time, of course, jobs were getting shipped overseas and unions started losing lots and lots of members. So you have the rise of the big business lobby and the slow loss of unionization. But another important factor also happened, and that is we had the beginning of the backlash to the civil rights movement. And so right when business was surging, unions were being decimated, the Republican Party was embarking on a very deliberate strategy to divide the working class at the time, and to divide the working class by race. And I talk a lot in the book, it's called the Southern Strategy, where it was really deliberate. It started with Nixon, it reached, we had the welfare queens of Reagan, but this has been a deliberate strategy of using racial anxiety, racial animosity, and equating government with others who aren't deserving. And that vision of who has access to government benefits became highly racialized. It still is highly racialized. We just now have a candidate who's actually being really explicit about it and not using dog whistles. So those two things all happened in this really compressed amount of time in the 70s, where you had a political strategy that was designed to divide the working class and really undermine economic justice and solidarity. And then you had a big business lobby that we're still seeing the effects of. And that was decimating. We now have a system where capitalism is writing the rules for our democracy instead of the other way around.
Your title thesis, Sleeping Giant, is that this sleeping giant, this enormous working class, is beginning to awaken to its potentially enormous political clout. And you argue that this would be good for all Americans, not just for working class Americans. If this continues, if this sleeping giant really does wake up, what forms do you see this transformation taking? What are some of the outcomes you would anticipate?
I think, in general, before I get to policy, which I could just talk about all day, because I'm a public policy person, I think it would be, more importantly, a real cultural shift, where the idea that there are makers and takers, or where it's okay on Labor Day for a Republican congressman to send out an email on Labor Day congratulating all the entrepreneurs and small business owners, that wouldn't happen. That we would go back to a recognition that capital and labor need each other, and that work of all kinds has dignity and has value in our society. So that's one thing. And I do believe policy plays a role in that. So I think we're starting to see some of it. But I think we need a soup to nuts, what I call a better deal for the new working class. And that means the United States really needs to catch up with the rest of the world and provide paid family leave and actual universal affordable child care. That we would have a democracy where big money is not able to control the agenda and decide who runs and who gets elected and what laws actually get debated. So we would have a campaign finance system where small donors are really setting the table for our democracy. And then finally, we would finally get be really deliberate and comprehensive about addressing the origins of our country and the racial oppression on which capitalism was founded, and on which reverberates still to this day in the form of our institutions and our economy. And so I think that piece is super important. I think it is the thing, race is what holds America back from being the best it can be.
One of the things you say in the book, one of the things you advocate is that we dream big, that we not settle for, small solutions here and there. And the old industrial jobs that we lost that actually were so crucial to creating the middle class started out as lousy jobs. I mean, those jobs in the auto industry, in the mines, in the steel mills, and all kinds of other places, the pay was lousy. The working conditions were incredibly dangerous. Sometimes, they could be fatal. You had no job security at all, and it was through the militancy of the workers themselves and the unions that turned them into terrific jobs and built a middle class. Is there any reason why these new jobs in this new middle class, is there any reason why this class cannot ultimately be successful in organizing and turning these jobs into really good jobs, solidly middle class jobs? Or is that a pipe dream?
I don't think it's a pipe dream. I think it's about building political will and public pressure. I think what might be different is I'm not sure that wages can do all the heavy lifting in terms of creating a middle-class lifestyle for these workers. I think we need more public investment in things like childcare. $15 an hour is a huge increase, but that's still not going to be enough to be able to provide high-quality, affordable childcare for your family. So we have to get realistic about not only looking at wages, but looking at public investment in things that we all benefit from higher education to childcare to paid family leave to finally actually making healthcare a real universal right in this country. And then modernizing our safety net, which is so threadbare and so miserly and so meager and mean-spirited that it can't keep up with the volatility in today's labor market, and it desperately needs to be strengthened and expanded. So yes, we can do better wages. Thanks. Wages is one prong, but there's a lot of other prongs that we gotta make happen for people to really, have a good life.
Talk about writing this book. I knew it. I knew it. Being a writer, the proper response is, I once said, "Don't let your children grow up to be Jet fans." I might also say, don't let your children grow up to be writers. But anyway, talk about it. What was your daily routine? What did uh-oh.
My husband's right here,
what did it do to your life? So did you get up early in the morning? Do you write in the morning? Did you drink boo gobs of coffee? Did you holler at him? Tell us about it.
So let's see. I went down to a 3-day work week at Demos it ended up being a year. Thank you. And ended up taking a couple, I think 3 months, the whole month off. So it was a slog. I think my key was coffee, but my real key was Juji fruits. Anytime I got stuck, I don't know what it is about that big yellow box, but I would go to Rite Aid, I'd get the big yellow box, and magically the words would just start coming out. So,
that's what I've been missing, the Juji fruits.
I'm telling you. I'm not a morning writer. Morning was more like just shaking off the cobwebs and, oh no, I don't really get going until about 1 o'clock. which is a problem. Not at work. Not at work. But when it comes to writing, so I would use that time to, like, I'd go through interview notes. I pretty much didn't start writing until 11 or noon, sometimes 1. But it wasn't like I was just, you know, on Facebook for the first 3 hours of the day. I did other kinds of work that needed to be done for the book.
And did you write at the computer directly from notes, or did you have to write paragraphs in longhand on a legal pad, or would you do?
Directly on the computer.
Directly on the computer.
On my couch with a little lap desk.
All right.
I can't write at a desk.
And how many hours a day could you actually write? Not work, but actually write.
4 to 5.
Whoa.
Is that weird?
Her life is nothing like mine, man. I got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Ugh.
And 2 or 3 hours actually writing is the maximum. After that, you don't want to read anything that I might.
I didn't say it was good writing. You know, I had to edit it. My editor had to do some work too.
Yeah.
But maybe 4 hours is probably not realistic.
You say nice things about your editor, by the way.
My editor is amazing. Jerry Howard from Doubleday, right there. Hi, Jerry. This is my second book with Jerry and with Doubleday, and it's been great.
All right. Final question.
Okay.
Thinking in terms of the next 2 or 3 generations of young people in America. I grew up in the best period possible to grow up in America, those early post-war decades when jobs were plentiful, college was affordable. I mean, it was great. It's tough now for young people. But looking ahead 2 or 3 generations, are you optimistic or pessimistic, and why?
I'm optimistic, absolutely, because I think the path we're on is just unsustainable and increasingly just frankly unacceptable to more and more people. And I hate that this is the case, but one of the reasons I am optimistic is that everything that hit the working class first and hardest, so, you know, is trickling up into the professional class. And the reality of who has power in this country makes that a really important development for actually finally getting serious about addressing these problems. And what I mean by that is the ideology that says it's okay, you know, to rip off your workers by not paying them overtime or making them clock out but still do work is the same ideology that has us all tethered to our smartphones even when we go on vacation, right? That has created this we have to be working all the time culture. It's the same philosophy. It's just squeezing and squeezing more and more out of people. You know, the same philosophy that cuts food stamps is the same philosophy that's cutting higher ed funding. So it's all the same ideology, it's all the same playbook, and it has decimated the working class. It started there, but it is now deeply reaching into the professional middle class, and that is going to provide, I think, real wind in the sails of the fight the working class is starting and engaging in right now.
Sleeping Giant, it's a great book. Tamara Draut, thank you.
Questions?
Right.
Do we have a
Yes,
microphone for questions or no?
Just yell.
Okay, just yell them.
Well, first, thank you for your optimism and holding up victories that we all need to be more aware of and inspired by. But if I could push a little further on the point of how the new working class is going to transform America, specifically, what are the vehicles? Is it going to be through the Democratic Party, capturing that again? Is it going to be through revitalizing the labor movement? I mean, it's one thing to have a shopping list of policy demands, but you need the political power to achieve that, and I'd like to hear more how you see that.
Yep, good question. So I would argue that it will most likely be the Democratic Party, and that we do need one of the parties to really shift its platform to being squarely focused on the working class. That historically has been the Democratic Party. I think that will continue to be the case. I would love to see a revitalized union movement. I think that there are now viable options outside of the labor movement, and we're seeing that with Fight for 15. So it's a good question. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I think the working class will build it through real protest and what do you call it, militancy? But your question's a serious one, and I think people are pretty pessimistic that we will ever get back to unionization rates of 1/3 of the workforce belonging to a union. I would like to say that we will get back there. I don't think we'll get back there without serious labor law reform, and we won't get serious labor law reform without a really powerful working class. And so I think anything is possible when people are willing to push for it.
And one quick question.
Yep.
You mentioned in your book that women are playing an ever larger role, both in this new working class, but also in the labor movement. And of course, you know, with the help of Donald Trump, women have become like an ever larger factor in this presidential campaign. So can you talk a little bit specifically about the role of women in this potential transformation that you see?
Yeah, I mean, what's really exciting is the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter are all women. The Fight for 15 and the SEIU is run by Mary Kay Henry, who is a phenomenal leader and an inspirational figure, and has really made a big bet on the Fight for 15 in terms of how much resources SEIU is putting into it. So I think women will be at the forefront of this movement, and will make stuff happen like we do.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Tammy.
Hey, Jerry.
Oh, my. Yes, sir.
It was too large to be of any use editorially, but not too large to ask here. It's about, it really bothers me that the American attitude towards unions.
Yeah.
Is so strangely negative now. And I was born in 1950, and I grew up in an America where unions were a big, big part of the American ethos and system, and labor leaders were big figures on the American stage, and we understood that unions were part of the things that made us prosperous. That has totally disappeared at this point, this mentality, and I think weirdly most Americans have a negative view of unions. And I know how that happened, but how do you change that to get people to see that unions are a route to a better life, not just for the members of the union, but for everybody?
Before you answer that, can I just piggyback on that question? Because it was one of my questions and we didn't have time to ask it, so thank you. But in 2008, when when Barack was running for the first time, I was out in Ohio covering the campaign, and I was with some union people going door to door, and I was really surprised because, like you, I grew up in a period when people had tremendous respect for unions, and you know, unions had all kinds of clout. And again, I would interview people, ordinary working people, and they would be hostile to unions, and I would ask why, and they would say things like, well, you know, the folks in whatever union, this union or that union, they make more money than I do, as though that was a negative, as opposed to a sense of, well, one of the reasons they make more money is because they're organized, et cetera, et cetera. So, sorry to interrupt, but that has really been bugging me.
It's another piece of the weirdness.
Yeah. So, part of the organized business lobby was to really take it to the unions. That has been a big part of what this new organized business lobby has been doing. And we're seeing it now. I mean, it just breaks my heart that we have right-to-work laws in Michigan.
Insane.
You know, like the cradle of economic democracy. So it's been a huge focal point of the conservative movement to really chip away and make it much harder for unions to replenish their members that they lost through offshoring of jobs. I also think, again, I'll go back to gender and maybe race as well, which is unions for so long were associated with industrial male jobs. And when those left, it was kind of like, well, guess we're done with unions, don't need them anymore. And I think that we just haven't, as a society, realized that there was nothing so special about manufacturing jobs that made them easy to unionize. And in fact, we could have a unionized fast food sector.
We should have.
And maybe we will have. So I think part of it is just, ever since the Wagner Act, which basically established the procedures and the legal right for workers to organize themselves in the workplace, ever since that act was passed, it has been the bane of conservative philosophy. And it has been something that has been viciously attacked and undermined throughout our history. And I think people see unions as an outdated, anachronistic thing in this shiny, tech-savvy economy that we supposedly live in.
Yes, ma'am.
As we see the affordability of the urban areas decrease, people are moving outside of the urban areas, how is the working class staying tethered together in this movement?
Good question. Let me see how, you stumped me for a minute. I think they are staying together because segregation by race and by class is still really, really deep and really, really solid. I think what is happening is all of the working class are paying more for housing than ever before, and housing that is often very subpar, close to being unsafe, certainly unhealthy, and that the United States has not for a very long time given much thought to housing policy, particularly for working class people. And so I think there is community because we are so segregated by class and race. It's maintaining that solidarity outside of the neighborhood level that has really gotten hard because of the loss of unions, because of the loss of party, which used to also provide that role for people. So I guess I would push back that I'm not sure that there's a lack of solidarity at the community level. I feel like the lack of solidarity is how to transcend out of the neighborhood into a large-scale solidarity movement for economic and racial justice.
I'm told just one more, so
what?
Ma'am, back
wow.
there. I know.
Me?
Do we have to stop? Yes.
Okay, I would like to get back to the status of women in our economy. So often women, in order to pay the rent, particularly single moms, have to work 2 or 3 jobs, and they don't have time to be active in work. They're just struggling to stay afloat. I mean, I think a lot of women know what that's like. And in recent years, so many of the states have cut taxes on the wealthy particularly, and cut services. The kinds of services that you're talking about that we need to invest in our population. So, how do we get back to, I don't know if anybody saw Michael Moore's but all of these things all of these services that we once had, and people in my generation enjoyed. I too graduated from college with no debt, and so I'm an active member of the League of Women Voters, So I would love to see people get out and vote, particularly in the off-year elections, when it's really important to the state legislators. So how do we get people involved? You know? How do we mobilize these people?
Great questions. I'm going to steal a page from our president's playbook, but probably not be as eloquent about it. But I think fundamentally, the big question that we have to wrestle with is, what do we owe each other in this society? And who do we owe it to? Do we all deserve childcare, free college tuition, health care, a job that's, you know, decent enough to feed your family on? That question of who is an American and who should have access to things that we all publicly support through our taxes is the fundamental question that we've been fighting about for the last 50 years, and that is at the centerpiece of the rise of Trump. And he is calling that question. The other thing I will say, though, is do not underestimate single moms and their ability to get shit done despite working 2 to 3 jobs. Because I can tell you, the fight for 15 would not exist without those women.
You might have to lose one of those jobs just to...
They might get hired as an organizer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.